Thank you for joining us for your reporter behind the story on CBS News Colorado. I'm Kelly Worthman. The goal of this segment is to give viewers like you transparency on how a story came to be by asking your reporter who put it together. The story we're looking at now is Venezuelan migrants coming to Colorado looking for jobs. This is an issue we've been following closely in the Denver area, and now migrants are hoping to find employment in the high country as well. Your reporter for the Mountain, Spencer Wilson, caught up with some migrants looking for work near Aspen.
Immigrants Asdrubal and Wilson got lucky today. They were able to help a Carbondale local move for some cash, way more than they made back in Venezuela.
A standard salary in the country of Venezuela would be $10 a month. If I buy a sack of flour, you didn't buy cheese. If you buy cheese, you don't buy the meat.
Their families were starving, so they came here. But with a huge group, Carbondale cannot help all of them with housing at once. So cars are their best option, 2 or 3 to a car.
And the cold in the night turns these cars into a freezer. So a lot of them aren't sleeping fully throughout the night because they're waking up so often to turn the car on, heat it up, turn it off. So they an hour, 2 hours so it can be warm, and then the heat is gone in 30 minutes. At most, we're sleeping 3 hours a night.
Those 3 hours may be spent dreaming of when they can become more established and make a real living for their families who are living out of cars and on the floors of friends' apartments.
Here they've got shovels so that they can shovel snow if anybody needs them to shovel snow for work.
But they haven't found a long-term solution. They only know the current one can't last.
There's no way that I could put my child in a car if I can't handle the cold in the car.
So they pick up work whenever they can, thankful for each opportunity that they get. And if you're thinking, how do we help?
We don't want to be an obligation to these people, to be an extra responsibility. All we need is help with the job. With a job, we have everything.
Your reporter, Spencer Wilson, joining us now from Summit County about this story. So, Spencer, I'm curious, first of all, how did you come across this story? How did it come about?
Kelly, it's interesting. We were in Carbondale for a completely different reason. We were following up on a story out of Glenwood Caverns. Obviously, a tragedy with that situation that could have been much worse. We were digging into a couple of clues we had regarding the additional information into that story. But while we were there asking questions, we just happened to run into somebody who was moving in to an apartment complex. And they said, you know what? I've got a story for you. What about these guys? And I said, which guys? And they said, these 2 guys helping me move into my apartment who are from Venezuela, and they have 84 people in Carbondale right now, all looking for work, living under a bridge, living in their cars, and basically nowhere else to go. So it was just a simple fact of being in the right spot at the right time and asking the right questions of, yeah, tell me more.
Right, which is always a good question to ask, and I love it when one story leads to another. And this one certainly, Spencer, has a lot of heart, has a lot of concern. I mean, you could kind of see it on those gentlemen's face in your story, just about kind of how broken they are. What's it like for those men that you talk to, and what they say is happening there in Carbondale?
Abysmal is the best word I can use to describe. It is, they are very hopeful. They keep saying, by the grace of God, we will get through this, we will figure this out, especially before the snow comes. But if you're looking at this with the hard facts, they are in a place, Carbondale, that already has a housing crisis. They are searching for work, which there is potentially work for them up there, but getting work visas and also finding those openings, as well as being able to communicate. There is a large Spanish-speaking population in the Roaring Fork Valley. Granted, they are still, that's potentially a barrier that they'll have to overcome, as the majority of them only speak Spanish. And then you also have the fact that they are just getting by on donations in terms of food and clothing. That's about it. They are, as you've heard in that story, sleeping in their cars the majority of the time. Now, thankfully, there is a nonprofit that has opened their doors to them in the evenings so they can actually go in and sleep inside and not freeze inside of their cars. But before that happened, they were talking about turning on the car only a little bit so they didn't use up too much gas to turn on the heater, falling back asleep, getting too cold, waking up because they were freezing in the car, turning it back on. ad nauseum, basically. And it sounds like the very worst sleeping situation you can imagine, aside from just sleeping outside with no shelter.
Sure. I mean, there's so many issues here to talk about, Spencer. I mean, whether it be the housing crisis, which we know is difficult up there in the high country, you know, the migrant crisis, which we know we've covered, you know, quite a bit here in the city, in the Denver metro area. Now with your reporting, how it's extending up into our mountains. But, you know, there's always the goodness of Coloradans, right, who want to step up and help. You know, what's another way that we could be doing something just to help anybody up there, but especially these migrants?
Absolutely. It's interesting right now because right now there is no game plan. That's what the mayor told me when I spoke with him earlier this week. He said, we're doing our best to connect resources, get these guys connected to the people who want to help them, but that in and of itself is a job, and they have their own jobs already. They said they basically had to drop everything within their office and start trying to work on this problem to make sure that these guys are going to be okay, even though they came out of nowhere and it's not really their job to do so. They said it's just because they're human beings and trying to make sure that they're not suffering. But right now, we do know that and I don't want to butcher this name, excuse me, it's Vocas Unidas de las Montañas up in Glenwood Springs, as actually doing their very best to make sure that they are at least staying clothed and have food. Considering there's a large group of people, 84 people, they can probably churn through some food pretty fast. In terms of shelter, that's still a big question mark. But what you heard them say in that story at least is that if you do have the opportunity to present some work for these guys, especially up in the Roaring Fork Valley, try and get a hold of City Hall, try and get a hold of the mayor and help connect these dots because they are desperate to find something to work. That's the other thing is while they are accepting charity at this point, they really don't want to. They're coming from a place where they have already had solid jobs. It's just the economy has basically collapsed with hyperinflation. And so the money they would make there wasn't enough to feed their families. And they said, we can starve here or we can try going to Colorado, see what happens up there. And hopefully we can keep our families alive. And it's really that do or die for these guys.
So tough to see. So Spencer, you know, you asked them, tell me more. So I'm going to ask you this question too. Tell me more. Where are you going next with this story? There's so much to follow up here.
Absolutely, and that's really the crux of it, is just staying on top of it, making sure that we're tracking what happens with the guys, where they're going, and who's helping them. We do know that on Friday we're expecting to talk with Vocas Unidas de las Montañas to have a real conversation about what they're able to actually provide for these guys in the meantime. Because we did see in that gymnasium, they have a big stack of food with them, but it's your standard food that you can basically get at a food pantry. And then once that runs out, they can't keep a continuous supply of this. It's finding the permanent patches to this temporary solution for these guys that's going to be the real crux of the problem, and making sure that we keep our eyes on it and try and help connect as many people who want to help. That's going to be the real focus of this. I already have had a couple of emails from our viewers saying that they want to try and help out and that they'd be interested in not only providing housing but also working opportunities for these folks, not necessarily in the mountains. One of the viewers was from Fort Collins and said they'd love to have them up on their horse ranch to help them out up there. Anything like that where we can get people who are getting creative and helping come up with some solutions, or like, you know, we could add one more employee and I know 2 of them do speak Spanish and therefore we could make this work. We have to get creative. And that's the other part, is that Carbondale said that they are hopeful that other people raise their hand. They said, we're going to be in this. We're not giving up, but we really need help. This can't just be us.
Right.
So they're looking to local county governments nearby, because they basically straddle 2, and said, please, someone help us. Because otherwise the federal and state government, they said, so far they have not had a lot of success in getting any support from them.
Right. It's one thing to say, hey, here's a problem. It's another to say, here's a problem and here are some solutions. Spencer, thank you so much for being part of this and taking us behind the story. And remember, Spencer covers what is happening in our country really like no one else. You can check out his stories, including his follow-up with Carbondale's mayor, right now on our website, cbscolorado.com.